So welcome back to class. We are in chapter 9. This is week number 9, so we're in chapter 9. It's very easy to kind of keep following the structure. So in the previous chapters, we worked through organization. We worked through some kind of how to structure your speech, how to organize it. We've talked about outlines, quite a bit. Now we're getting to a little bit more finer aspect of our speech craft. And that is particularly the wording. How are you going to word your speech? How are you going to sort of articulate these ideas? So when we get to the question of language, I know it can get very complicated. Language is rarely easy. And if you don't know English language so well, then, that's challenging. So delivering a speech in a language that you don't know so well is actually quite a challenge. But so here's a few things that the authors present to us in this chapter that we need to keep in mind just at the top of our heads. First of all is that what makes language, when you're delivering your speech, what makes language so nice, you're not delivering a written speech, you're delivering an oral presentation, is that it's referential. Meaning you're going to make references to things that are all around you. They're right there in the room with you, so to say, in your presence. And that makes it a little bit different. Remember we talked in the beginning of the course what makes a live speech different. What makes a live presentation better, more dynamic, more exciting, versus something pre-recorded, something that you're watching. And that's the fact that you can make references to things that are happening right now, right here, in this very space. And so that makes it interactive, it makes it real. So there's this references that we keep making in live person-to-person communication. And also language has a value that's very relational. Why? Because you and I, if you're my audience and I'm the speaker, we actually have a relationship. So obviously, in a class setting, our relationship is defined very clearly. I'm the instructor, you're the student, so we have very clear lines of understanding. But even if you're standing and speaking in front of people, you actually do have a relationship with them. Remember how we talked about the idea of, you having responsibilities before your audience, that you're supposed to provide them with information that is good and trustworthy, that you have to be acting in good faith, essentially, because if they don't think that you're on their side, then they have no reason to listen to you, and they certainly don't have a reason to believe you. So there's a relationship that exists between an audience and a speaker, okay? And then there's a lot of symbolism that happens in a speech. A lot of times speech is a kind of a device that is highly emotional. And in doing that, we convey emotions with symbols a lot of times. We can literally make people feel angry or sad, depending on what we say and how we say it, and what context we bring up, And so that makes a live speech a very powerful element in our society. This is why people study speaking. That is why people practice speaking. That's why people become good speakers, because they realize the kind of power they actually command when they have an opportunity to sway public opinion, to motivate people to move in a particular direction or not. So in that sense, oral delivery of an oral speech is a very powerful device. And there's a reason why, in the Western culture at least, since the ancient times, people have been utilizing the power of speech to advance themselves in the society, okay? So obviously there's a big difference between oral communication and written communication. So we're not talking, some things that we talk about apply to both speeches and writing papers, let's say. If you're writing an essay, a lot of times like an outline, for example, that we've been talking, applies to both, right? But now we're getting to the section of this chapter, things here apply much more to speaking and a lot less to writing, okay? So when we use language we express ideas, we put ideas into words. And when we do this orally, it has to do with the way we do it. It affects our style, it affects our delivery. Written style is one thing, and oral style is an entirely different sort of say dimension. So when we are speaking in front of people, we are creating an atmosphere. Now, if you haven't noticed in my class, I like to create an atmosphere where people want to learn, where they're curious, they want to discover, they want to ask questions. You know, I always ask you about questions, ask me questions, because I want to create an atmosphere of interaction. I want to create an atmosphere, I want to talk about what you want to talk about. I want to explain that which you perceive to be most difficult or hard to understand or most interesting. Okay, that's part of my teaching methodology is like that. So that's why I keep saying ask questions, because I want to talk about what you want to talk about. So everyone sort of say has their own, but that is part of creating an atmosphere. That is part of, I want to create an atmosphere of learning that is, friendly, that has you in mind. Because I can just show up here and just stand and just lecture for 2 hours straight and then go away and don't say, ask any questions or give you no examples, and just give you information, just like anything else. Like, I owe you information, so here's what I owe you. Here's the information. Now do with it whatever you want. I can do it that way, but by doing so, I would also create an atmosphere, and that is not the atmosphere I want to create. So I don't do that. So having said that, we as speakers create a very particular atmosphere, and we use our speech, oral language, and we use it in a very strategic way to do so. So when you are given a speech, you have to consider what atmosphere you're creating, what words you're using, how you're using them, and what sort of an effect they're having. So that brings me to the discussion that the authors begin in this chapter, talking about oral style versus written style. Now, I don't know, I'm hoping, I'm trusting that you had a chance to read through this section right now, and can you give me any reflections of oral style versus written style? Tell me, do you speak the way you write? No. What about you? Do you speak the way you write? Or do you write the way you speak? I find lots of people write the way they speak, and that's because they usually don't know how to write. Well, that's okay, because it's a skill. A lot of people just don't know how to write, and that's okay. It's a skill. You learn it. If nobody taught you, then you generally would write the way you speak. I have people who have turned in papers that are all colloquial, that use slang and all sorts of interesting words that I'm not even sure what they mean sometimes, and it's very conversational. It's very kind of down to earth. It's like as if I just dropped in on their conversation with a friend. It's fine. But in reality, people who have training in speaking and people who have training in writing do not speak the way they write and do not write the way they speak. Because these are two different styles. Now, do you think you can express yourself in two different styles? No. No? One style for you? Just everything one style?
No, maybe you can, when you speak, you have to know something like what you want to speak and the other, what they want to listen
Sure.
to you.
But we're talking about style.
We're style, because everybody has their different style.
Content is going to be the same. What I'm trying to tell you is that you could say the same content in a different style, depending on who you're talking to, or depending if you're writing or talking.
Yeah.
Same information,
Same information.
but delivered differently.
See.
You can do that.
Yeah.
I know you can.
If you get.
And I wanted to get that through so that make sure we're on the same page, because I think all of us already do it. Sometimes we don't realize it. I mean, you speak differently to different people, right? So if your 90-year-old grandmother is in a room, you're gonna behave differently, okay, then it's going to be a bunch of your college friends. You might not sit up and put your feet on the table and do crazy things or something like that. You might just use different words. You might use different language. With your friends, you probably will joke around and laugh and make all kinds of references to things that they would know about. But with your 9-year-old grandma, you're probably going to be different. And so what happened? You altered your style. You're still communicating, but you altered your style. The way you tell the same story to your 9-year-old grandmother and to one of your classmates is going to be entirely different. Why? Because the needs of the audience are entirely different. And the relationship that you have with the audience is entirely different. And so you're simply matching that, which makes total sense. So, I hope that makes sense to you guys. So that your written style and your oral style are not exactly the same. Now, what is the main difference between oral style and a written style? Just by mere observation. When you write a paper versus you speak those things, same exact information, what is the difference? Formality, exactly. It's the type of language you use. It's the type of words you use. In speech, you're informal. You're free to use colloquials. In speech, you're welcome to wave your hands, right? Say no, or something like that. See, but I can't do that if I'm writing. I can't say an emphatic no by waving my hands. I would have to still communicate that I really want you to understand, no way, but I can't use my hands there. I can't use my face. I can't use my emotion the same way that I would be in speech. So I have to convey the same ideas, but now through words. So I'm going to have to go an extra mile maybe. I have to write maybe a little bit extra and communicate that same idea that not just I'm not saying no, I'm saying absolutely no. I'm saying no way this is going to happen. So you get the idea. Speech is informal. Just like in our conversations, we're very casual. Now, written style is formal. And the textbook gives you a couple of examples over here, which I think they're really cool, okay? If you look at page 138, here's the same truth communicated in two styles. In a written style, it says, remit the requested amount forthwith. Okay, that sounds like a contract language right there, okay? If you ever sign like a real estate contract or employment contract, it will say something like that. You sign a loan document from a bank, it will say something like that. It will say, the customer must remit the requested amount forthwith on such and such date, subservient to, section this, paragraph that, or something like that. That's like formal language, right? Well, in oral style, you just say, pay a bill. You see how different? Same message. The message says, you have to pay your bill. But it says it in such words that we don't actually use in our everyday, average oral style of communicating. Nobody goes around and says to their roommate, hey, did you remit the requested amount to the phone company this month? Or did you remit to Xfinity $99.99 or something like that? You don't talk to your classmates or your roommates, friends like that. No, you just say, hey, did you pay the bill this month? Because somehow our internet is not working or something like that. The way we speak orally is just that, casual. But in writing, we communicate the same ideas in a very different way. So when a person reads a speech, because they wrote the speech, this is part of the reason why I don't want you to learn how to write speeches. I actually don't want you to write speeches. I want you to write outlines. I don't want you to write speeches. When I say write speech, I mean craft speech. But I don't actually mean write it out as if you would a paper or an article. So a lot of times when people write a speech and they read that speech or they memorize the way they wrote it, you know what's going to happen? It's going to sound very formal. It's going to sound unemotional. It's not going to hit the same high notes that you're speaking from the bottom of your heart will. Let's put it that way. Because when you speak from just yourself, being yourself, it comes off very differently than when you're speaking from a piece of paper. Even if that was originally a piece of paper and then you later memorize it. Like, for example, I watch people debate and I watch people speak, like formal speeches, like, presidential candidates or something like that. And I can tell when they switch from what they are actually thinking to what the people trained them to say. It's amazing. It's like they just shift into a different gear and they sound like a different person. And the reason they do is because they are reciting something they memorized, and it's a different style. So they're not able to adapt it. The true art is to take that information, digest it, and adapt it, and your style actually doesn't change. So you come off as a real and genuine person, as if you're actually truly thinking it. That would be a real, true, art in a situation like that. So hopefully that makes sense. On the topic of our informality in our speech, how many words do you think we actually use in the everyday informal speech? How many words do you think we use? Is our vocabulary really broad? How big of your vocabulary needs to be in order to be able to go through a day, an average day, and just talk to people around you? What do you think? 10,000 words? 5,000 words? Let's say you do talk a lot. We're not talking about volume. We're talking actual vocabulary. So, a lot of times we repeat the same word over and over and over. So, just like right now, I have repeated myself. I keep repeating the same words. I did probably use the word word at least already 80 times, just since the time I started. Or word language. How many times have I used the word language? So if you take all the actual words that I've used in my casual speech, how many words do you think that would be?
500?
Probably. You're pretty close, actually. You're probably pretty close. Now, in a setting like this, where we're academic, when we're talking about book stuff, book learning, big words, yeah, there's going to be more words. But in an average conversation, when you go about your life, you actually use less than 500 vocabulary words a day. In an average day, just think, what would you be doing? You get in your car, drive, get on the phone, talk to your friend, right? What do you tell your friend? Some silly fact about some gossip or something that you're sharing, that, hey, I saw this yesterday on news, or can you believe this traffic? Whatever you're going to be talking about, it's probably going to be not that complicated, and it's going to have a limited range of words. So actually, we don't actually use that many words, not in a casual speech. Now, formal speech, much more so. So probably even less than 500 actual vocabulary words we would use in any given day for an average person to communicate. Now, here's a funny statistics. Women actually use more. They do. Guys talk less. So I think that statistic is skewed just because guys say fewer things. Women tend to say more, and therefore they end up using more words. Plus, the vocabulary that women use is much more sophisticated in a sense that they define colors with much greater precision. They talk about emotions with a much greater precision, where guys, they're just, very plain in that sense. Again, that's not always true for everyone. I'm being stereotypical, okay? But in a common sort of say, there are people who are not average, let's put it that way. But for an average person, that has been proven to be true. Okay, so when you communicate orally, there are several things that you need to focus on. And that's what the next part of this chapter is trying to highlight. And these things are accuracy, simplicity, and restatement. Accuracy, simplicity, and restatement. I'm on page 140, if you're interested to track with me. If you're writing a speech, if you're putting together a speech, and in this case, this could be related even to an essay, but speech even more so. You keep these things in place, your speech will come out better. you keep these features, you keep thinking about these aspects of your speech will come out better. Let's say you already wrote your outline. Let's say you already got your central idea and all these things worked out. Okay, so you have the skeleton of your speech. Now you're really working on the meat, let's put it that way. Now you're putting the meat on the bones. And so accuracy becomes very important because oral presentation, orality, when we speak vocally, it's always concrete and always specific. You can try to evade specificity. You could try to speak in generalities to people, and they will not understand what in the world you're saying. Maybe you have heard somebody speak. Now, I've heard people speak probably for like 2 minutes straight, and I could not figure out what in the world they were saying. Not because I did not understand the words they were saying, but because I had no idea how they were using those words. Because they were not using words that have very specific and concrete meaning. So to me, the accuracy of what they were trying to say, assuming they were actually trying to say something specific, something meaningful, was gone. It just was not there, okay? I don't know if you realize this or not, but the words that we use are actually symbols, okay? And those symbols actually represent objects. Every word is a symbol. It is packed with certain emotional meaning and force. It is packed with imagery for each one of us. And the amazing part, and this is really hard in making speeches, is that every single person has a slightly different imagery attached to the same exact word. So if I use a word, you're going to understand that word one way, but he's going to understand it a different way. Okay? And so here's a fun little exercise for you guys. I want you to, you guys have good imagination? Good imagination? Would you call yourself imaginative people? Not really? You couldn't use imagination? Can you fantasize about something with me? Okay? Here's what I want you to fantasize about. I want you to fantasize that it's your birthday. And I want you to fantasize that I'm your best friend. And I want to make you feel really good and happy. So for your birthday, I'm going to buy you a car. Okay? And for your birthday, I am getting you to buy your car. And, you know, basically, and I say, you know, I have, you know, $15,000 to spend. So I'm going to buy you a car. So you and I walk up to a lot. You know, we just drive to a place, park at whatever, Atlanta, Toyota, or anywhere. We park over there, and we walk out in the lot, and we see all these cars. And you pick a car that you're going to buy. Now, what is the car that you are picking? What car? If I say, here's a good car, and I point to it, what car am I pointing? Just in your imagination. BMW. That's a good one. Which one am I pointing to?
Camaro.
Okay, Camaro. So a little different. Okay, good. So which car am I pointing to? Jesus sleep. Okay. So anybody else? Which car am I pointing to? John Jay. Which car? Just what would be the car that you would want? If I gave you a gift of a car tomorrow, which one would you want? A Ferrari. He says he goes that. Huh? I don't know that one.
Looks like bench SLS.
Okay. Mercedes-Benz?
No, sports car.
Sports car. McLaren?
McLaren.
I have no idea. You got me. See, I have no idea. I know lots of cars. That one I do not know. McLaren. I know McLaren. That one I don't know. Okay, I'm going through all the different ones in my head. All right. So here's another illustration. Now, since you guys are good, I'm getting your imagination going. What I want you to see is that you guys are visualizing different cars. Okay. I say car. You say BMW. I say car. You say Camaro. Your mind goes to whatever you think is cool car is. Hey, look at that cool car. What am I pointing to? In his mind, I'm pointing to a Camaro. In yours, it's BMW. So here's what I want you to think about. It kind of visualize a tree. Can you see a tree in your mind? Kind of like in your mind side. Just you're imagining a tree now. I want you to imagine the details in that tree. I want you to see how thick the branches are. I want you to see the foliage of the tree. I want you to see every little detail. You seeing it? You have a tree in your mind? You visualizing it? Would you be able to describe it to me if I asked you to describe it? I'm not going to ask you to describe it, but if I asked you to describe a tree, could you describe that tree that you're seeing right now? Okay. So here's the experiment. Which tree did you see?
The tree I am seeing now is not that tall, not
Okay.
that tall, but it has a lot of branches and green leaves and many apples.
Apples. So you saw an apple tree. That's amazing. Okay, Jen, what did you see? What tree did you imagine? When I say tree, what would you visualize?
I don't have an idea.
You don't have any idea. Did you see a tree? I said, did you visualize a tree? You know, when you visualize a tree, what tree do you imagine? Huh? Palm tree? Banana tree? Oak tree?
Apple tree.
Apple tree, apple tree. Hey, now you're just copying. Okay. Okay, Steven, what about you? What kind of tree? I say tree, you say what kind of tree? Fruit tree? Maple tree?
In my heart, bamboo tree.
Bamboo tree. See, I like that. See, he saw a bamboo tree. That's cool. I didn't tell you what kind of tree to see, right? So what happened is your mind just filled in the details. I didn't tell you that your tree had to have fruits on it. I didn't tell you that the tree had to have leaves on it. Maybe that was a dead tree with no leaves at all. Maybe it was fall and the leaves were all turned colors. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just the tree that was just sprouting leaves in the springtime. I actually didn't tell you any details except just told you, see a tree. Can you visualize a tree in your mind? And what happened is your mind filled in the details. Whether it has fruit or it doesn't have fruit. That's a detail I didn't tell you. Your mind filled it in. So here's what I'm trying to explain to you, and it's a very simple concept, is that words are symbols. I say tree, and you think of a particular type of a tree that represents a tree to you. So to you, apparently a tree is represented by an apple tree. At least at that moment, that's what you thought about. When I said tree, you thought apple tree. I've had people who would think of a palm tree. He thought of a bamboo tree. Okay, so to him, that was the tree that came to mind. If I say tree, that's what he's thinking about. That's okay, because different people, some people are going to think Christmas tree. Other people are going to think oak tree. Everyone's going to be different. Okay. All I'm trying to say is that words are symbols. Whether I'm talking about a tree or a car, your mind is going to fill in the detail. Does that car have big tires? Is it an antique car? Is it a modern car? Is it an expensive car? Is it a cheap beat up car that's all scratched up? Your mind is going to fill in the details. Because I'm not telling you what kind of car, right? So now imagine this with me for a second. A person is giving a speech and they're using words, and each one of those words has a particular meaning to you that is special to you. And that's what makes it kind of tricky and difficult, because what it means to you doesn't always means the same thing to me. And I have to make sure and communicate clearly and accurately what it is that I'm saying. Okay? So if I say something is pretty, you know, what I think pretty is maybe very different than what you think is pretty. Why? Because what they say is absolutely true. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Different people think what pretty is different. So if I say pretty, I have to say what kind of pretty. What exactly makes it pretty? What exactly makes it, you know, so? Or if I talk about food that's delicious, and I'm just going to start describing it, and every one of you in this room is going to say, how is that delicious? That sounds terrible. Why? because once I start describing it, you actually realize that's not at all delicious to me. So words, precision with which you use them makes a big difference. And so the more precise you can be, the more accurate you can be in describing something. If you say something particular in your speech, you better be able to explain it. Give people the meaning. How do you use that word? What does that word really mean? What are you trying to say by that word, essentially? And so accuracy conveys clarity. It creates clarity in your message. If you are inaccurate, okay, if you're inaccurate, people will not understand what you're trying to say. Okay, so accuracy with choosing the right word, choosing the right terminology, explaining it just so, allows people to have a very clear idea what you're saying. So here's a few examples that the authors give us. This is really cool. I like this. So on page 140, they're talking about accuracy, and they say, you might say that an object shines, but an object must also glow, or glitter, or glisten, or flare, or gleam, or blaze, or shimmer, or glimmer, flicker, sparkle, flash, and beam. What just happened? These are all words that describe something of a shining, glittering, glowing effect. But these are all different words. And actually, if I'm going to start going through those words one by one, they don't have the same exact meaning. They're a little bit different. Okay? Because shining is not the same thing as beaming, and sparkling is not the same thing as glaring or blazing. These are not the same words. But if I was to describe a bonfire, I could use all those words to describe a bonfire. You see what I mean? It's like the precision with which I describe something actually makes a difference. The accuracy makes a difference. These are all slightly different words. So what word are you going to use to describe something? That will create a different perception in the person listening to your speech. All right? So that's our discussion of accuracy. Now simplicity sometimes is hard to achieve. Sometimes at the expense of wanting to sound really smart, we'll use really big words. Words that people don't know well. Words that people rarely use. I am always cognizant. Here, I just used a word that most people do not know. Of using words that people do not know. What does the word cognizant mean? Think. I just used a word that most people don't know. I could have used a simpler word. I could have said, I am always aware about the words I use, and try not to use the words that people do not know. See, the word aware, almost everyone knows. The word cognizant, probably top 30% people know it. Why? Because it's not a common word. You don't use it every day. You don't meet it everywhere you go. But the word aware, you meet all the time. So cognizant means consciously recognizing something. When you consciously recognize something as something, that's being cognizant of it. Okay? So what I just did is I said the same thing in two different ways. And in one situation I used the word aware, another situation I used the word cognizant. Now, when I said aware, everyone got it. When I said cognizant, several of you looked at me and you said, I have no idea what the word cognizant means. So you're losing my message. You're losing it. It's slipping away from you. Why? Because I'm not using a simple language anymore. And this is the power of simplicity in language. If you can say it simply, say it simply. Don't make it complicated. Now, some people make it complicated on purpose to make themselves sound smarter. That's all. But that's because they're compensating for whatever inability to speak well or inability to hold attention or whatever. I don't know. But a lot of times, Simplicity is what gets the job done, okay? Simplicity is what allows us to arrive at the destination that we want to be at. And what is our destination when we're making a speech? The person actually understands what we're saying, okay? So if you can say it simply, say it simply. Don't use big words, because that's when you're going to lose people. You can use words, you can use how many words you want, but make sure that people understand what those words are. If I have to use a word that most people do not know, I will explain that word. If I am aware of the fact that they do not know it. Sometimes I'm not even aware of it, but if I am aware, then I'm going to explain what that word is, what it means. Okay? And why do I do that? Because I think people are dumb and they need to be, explain everything? No, because I want to communicate clearly. Because I want, for my communication, to hit that point of being understood. Okay? Now, restatements. You probably have noticed I use a lot of restatement in this class. What is restatement?
One more time, repeat.
Repeat one more time. You're absolutely right. Repeating things one more time. I do that all the time. Why do I use restatement? Very simple. My job is to teach. My job is to explain. That means I will say the same things, sometimes 5 different ways. Because my goal is so that it settles in your mind, so that you understand it. So if you didn't understand it the first time, I'll say it differently the next time. If you didn't understand it that time, I'll say it differently the third time. And I keep trying to come up with new ways of saying it until I feel like I have covered a variety of ways in which it might settle in your brain. Because my job is to kind of deposit those things and let them stay there, right? Because eventually the quiz comes and you need that, right? That's the idea. So I use a lot of restatement. But even in your own speech, even if you're not teaching, restatement is a very powerful tool. Because it does allow you to confirm that what you're saying is exactly what you're saying. If the first time the listeners did not understand you, or maybe misunderstood you, or maybe didn't hear you all the way, then you have a chance to say it again, restate, okay? You repeat yourself. But don't repeat yourself in the same exact words. See, that's what the difference is between restatement and pure repetition. Pure repetition is just saying the same thing over and over. Sometimes you might want to say the same thing over and over. For example, if you have a central idea that you're trying to drive into people's head, it's good to recite that idea the same way over and over. Okay? Like if I'm talking about the danger of drugs, right? And I could say, drugs kill, right? And I'm going to say drugs kill like 50 different times in my speech, in different places. Why? Because that is the message I want you to understand. Drugs kill. So that's it. But that's repetition, that's not restatement. Restatement, if I would say drugs murder, drugs diminish your life, I would say drugs ruin everything around you. I could say it in so many different ways, and that would be more of a restatement rather than a repetition. Okay? Let's see. Hopefully that makes sense as well. You guys have any questions about those 3 aspects? Accuracy, simplicity, and restatement? Does that make sense? Do you think you can use that when you're writing your speech? Do you think you can sit down, write out your outline, come up with your central idea, and as you're working through your points, as you're putting the meat on the bones, you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, does everyone understand that word that I'm using? Maybe I should use a different word. You could say to yourself, wait a minute, maybe I should say the same thing in 2 different ways, and you create that moment of restatement for yourself. So, or say, did I say that right? Because that doesn't sound simple enough. It's like, why does it take me 15 minutes to explain this? That's not that complicated. I should be able to explain it in 5. And then you're utilizing those techniques, essentially. Making your speech better flowing, more interesting, more engaging, simpler, and so people actually comprehend what you're saying. Because I have seen people get up and speak, and I just wonder, what is it about? It's not I'm not listening, it's just I'm not getting it. Okay? So, let's see. talk just a little bit about strategic language use. I'm going to launch into just a little bit about language strategy, and then we'll take a little break, okay? So we talked about using these three aspects for your oral speaking style, okay? So the accuracy, the simplicity, and restatement. Now, there's a very powerful tool that you can use to create comprehension, to create accuracy, to make sure that people understand what you're saying. And that is work with definitions, okay? You can use definitions, you can use different imagery, meaning examples, and you can also use metaphors, okay? So let's talk a little bit about definitions. Is everyone familiar with what definition is? What is a definition? Meaning. So if I don't understand what some word means, where do I go? Dictionary, thank you, exactly. That's where I would go, dictionary. You know, I'm not gonna call my friend and say, hey, what does that word mean, right? That just makes me look stupid, right? No, I go to the dictionary, I look it up. So, and the dictionary is gonna give you a definition. And a lot of times, have you noticed in the dictionary, it will give you multiple things, not just one thing. It will say, to do this, and it'll give you 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. It could be very complicated words. You have like 10 different things that it'll give you about that one word. Now, you could see that already, that word can be understood in a variety of different ways. So that means that if you're going to use that word, you might need to explain to your audience in which way are you using that word. What are you trying to say by that word? So sometimes having a dictionary definition of the word is good. For example, if I'm giving a speech and I use a particular word, and I could say to my listeners that, and what I mean by such and such word is this, this, and this, and this, and kind of use one of those definitions from a dictionary. So let's say I got one of those 10 that I'm really using. So I can actually give people a dictionary definition. But sometimes dictionary definition is not that simple. Have you ever read a dictionary definition and say, wait a minute, I need a definition about definition? Because I actually don't understand half of these words the dictionary is using. Have you been there? I've been there before. I've read a word and then I go to the dictionary, I'm like, that doesn't help me at all. I'm still confused about what it means. Why? Well, because some things are complicated. So this is where we can use other types of definitions that are non-dictionary types of definitions. And so there are several definitions, one of them being stipulative, okay? Sometimes there's more than one meaning to that word, and we simply have to choose which meaning do we want to highlight, okay? It tells people how this particular word is being used in that exact context. For example, the word apple can be used in a variety of different ways, right? I can talk about the fruit I just ate, apple, or I can talk about apple, right? So you see how that could be so confusing? So if I'm going to be making a speech and I'm referencing apple in it, I might want to clarify what type of apple I'm talking about. Because to somebody else, that might not be clear. They may be confused because when I say apple, they think laptop or iPad or something else or iPhone. You know, that's what they think because that's what their world is. I may be talking about a fruit or something else for that matter. So you get the idea. That's called stipulative definition. That's where you say, this is what I mean by this word right now. And that's not difficult to explain, right? Yeah, the other one that sometimes comes to our help is called negative definition. Negative definition. What is a negative definition? Negative, an example of a negative definition is, I was walking yesterday down the street and I dropped an apple. I don't mean this one. I just told you which apple I did not drop. I didn't drop that apple, I dropped the other apple. That's called a negative definition. when you said to clarify the meaning by saying not this meaning that you might think about. I know you'll think about that meaning, but that's not what I mean. Okay? So there's just a lot of words in our society that have multiple meanings. And sometimes we have to say, this is not the meaning I'm using right now. So while stipulative says, this is the meaning I'm using, the negative definition says, this is not what I'm talking about. Okay? So when you define something positively or negatively, you're basically saving yourself trouble, because people can get confused and they have no idea. But defining a word either negatively or positively clears out that situation. Now, there's another definition, and sometimes you might have to use this one, okay? I get to use this one all the time, personally. Maybe it doesn't apply to you so much, and that's called etymological definition. Have you guys ever heard about the word etymology? And do you know what that means? Etymology. Not entomology. Entomology is the study of bugs. Etymology, E-T-Y. Okay. Etymology is the study of words and how words are made. Okay? So an etymological definition is a definition that breaks the word down to its core meaning. Okay? So when one word, for example, can derive from multiple words, I can break it down and explain to you what does it actually mean. Okay, so can you, let me think of an example that I can use. I gotta think of a complicated word that we can break down etymologically. Let's see. All right, good. Here's an example for you. No, it's not a good. Okay. Look at this. Have you ever seen this word before? Topography. 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 How would I use this word in a sentence? Or I could say, the topography of northern Georgia is not as flat as the topography of Florida. Do you hear what I'm saying? How am I using the word topography? The topography of northern Georgia is not the same as Florida. The shape of land, thank you very much. Shape of land, excellent. So, if I had to break up that word, this is how it's going to work out. I have the word topos, which means location, literally, in Greek. It's a Greek word. And graphe, well, graphe actually means writing or inscription. So, how does this location can be depicted, or written, or described, or pictured? We get the word graphics from that same word, graphe, in Greek. It means to write, describe something, to depict something, okay? So when I say, hey, send me the graphics for that new website that we've been working on, if I say that to my designer, they know exactly what I mean. They want, I want graphics for the website, they know. There's that word graphics. So topography. So what did I just do? I took the word, complicated word, it's actually a Greek word that we use in English, and I broke it down, and I explained to you what it means. That means I went into the word etymology. I went into the meaning of the word, out of which, a complicated word that's basically a combination of multiple words. So that's etymological meaning. Sometimes you may have to go and say, this is what this word really means. I know I'm using this word, I know most of you don't know this word, but this is what it means, and this is why it's important for you to know this word. There you go. You can use that type of definition. If you can avoid it, great. If you can't avoid it, then you might have to. Okay? And then the other is exemplary definition. Now, exemplary definition is what I just did right now, right here. Okay? This is called an exemplary definition. Okay? Watch this. What I told you, the topography of Georgia looks very different from Florida. This is what I mean, an exemplary definition. Florida is flat, Georgia has hills, Florida doesn't have it. So, exemplary definition is when you're saying, by example, you're explaining by example, what is that complicated word that you may be using. If you're using a word that you need to explain, you can give an example. You might tell a story to your listeners. You might draw a picture to your listeners. Whatever you got to do to explain what you mean by the word topography or any other complicated word you're explaining. I can explain it in a variety of different ways. I can break it down and explain to you what it means etymologically. I can show it to you through a visual representation, what it means. I can give you a number of examples of how, sort of say, I can explain a word or a phrase or an idea. Because this doesn't just go into words, this goes into ideas as well. In fact, I explain ideas all the time in this class by drawing on a board and stuff like that. One of my favorite ways of explaining an idea, you've already seen this, right? Is when I draw a picture of a fish, and that's how I explain to you your speech, right? That your speech is like a skeleton of a fish, where you grow the meat on the bones. That's my word picture, that's my explanation. I do this all the time, okay? Contextual definition is another type of definition where you basically have to explain, what that word means in that particular context, okay? Because here's an example. If you are my student in the speech class and you're learning how to speak, and I say to you, go home, work on your speech, and bring me back your fish. Those of you who have seen my drawings on the board will probably understand what I mean by bring me back your fish. What am I talking about if I say that? I want your outline. That's exactly what I want. Bring me your outline. That's what I'm saying. Don't show up over here with a carp or a herring or salmon, right? Because that is not what I'm asking for. So in context of our class, the fish means outline. But in context of me going out with you for lunch, it may mean sushi, right? Very different. Context defines the meanings of our words. So if you explain something, sometimes you may have to explain it in context. Okay? I can use words that have multiple explanations in multiple contexts. Okay? So that is another definition. That's contextual definition. Another one is analogical definition. And this is, I'm going to use the fish for the same thing. I'm using fish as an analogy of your outline. Okay? Analogical definition is when you're trying to explain something by something else. This is like that. Your speech outline is like a fish skeleton, right? That's an analogy. Now, why I'm using it? Because it helps people to think. It helps them to visualize it. It helps them to understand that it has multiple steps and things like that. Now, analogies are not perfect. They're never perfect. So you can't prove anything by analogy. You can't do these kinds of things, but you can certainly illustrate things through analogy.